In 1999, I moved back and bought 3/4 of land. When we went out and as a conventional farmer using conventional agronomy, because I went through the University of Saskatchewan, convocated in 1992, have been trained as a traditional agronomist, came back to the farm and decided, okay, we're going to get ready for spring and seeding. So we went out and we did the traditional pre-seed cultivation, and on a sandy land, a sandy loam soil, I was bringing up lumps. Those lumps then, when they dried out, just turned to powder. That's when I knew I had a serious issue on my hand. When I looked at the history of the management of the person that we purchased the farm from, they would grow wheat, bale the straw, burn the stubble. Then they'd grow barley, bale the straw, burn the stubble, and then black summer follow it. So I after that, I knew that that system was not working, so I was looking for change. So that was the start of my regenerative agriculture journey. I didn't know that it was called regenerative ag. Once again, you can put any title on anything. I just knew that the system was broken. So we started doing changes, and so this is kind of the quick story of our evolution of our management. So I guess first of all, what is regenerative agriculture? It's defined now as a system of rebuilding our soils to get closer to what they look like before they're brought into modern agriculture production. It aims to restore natural ecosystems, and it also aims to restore the carbon, the water, and nutrient cycles in our soils. Research has shown that the organic matter in our soils across North America have dropped somewhere between 40 and 60% from native soil levels, and in some areas it's even greater. Surface drainage, tiling, removing of wetlands is increasing across the whole area. And when I say area, just not around our place. This is the biggest thing is there's more and more energy going into draining, which confuses me because when you look at our history, we've had more droughts than floods. So it what's going on here? Why is this water accumulating on the surface? The amount of synthetics that we're using is increasing every year, whether it's increased fertilizer, whether it's stacking herbicides, whether it's just blatant use of fungicides all the time. We're using more and more, and they're decreasing the efficiencies. All of these signs show me that modern management system is broken. So the five main principles that I work on and I talk about is number one, leave that living root of a plant in the vegetative stage in the soil growing for as many days as possible. That's number one. That's one of the cornerstones in my mind. Number two, we need to increase the amount of plant diversity, and not just in that year potentially, but over this rotation. We need to reduce the amount of tillage we do, especially the intensity of the tillage we do. So min-till is great, but we have to crank it up a little bit more with more management. We need to reduce the amount of synthetics, and once again, that's the fertilizer, that's the insecticides, that's the fungicides. And then we also need to get back to incorporating livestock on our land. It's not necessary, but man, does it ever speed up the process of soil healing. So the first one, that living root of a vegetative plant in that soil. When a plant is in the vegetative stage, it'll release up to 80% of the carbon it captures through photosynthesis back into that rhizosphere, which really doesn't seem to make sense to an average producer, because why would a plant capture resource of carbon and then just release it back in the soil? But when you understand that when 85% of the nutrients that get into the plant have to go through the microbe, it kind of does make sense, because when that carbon goes into the soil, it stimulates microbe growth. And so we get an increased population. The plant has the ability through the root exudates to actually call on certain microbes in the soil to get certain nutrients freed up and brought into that plant. What else is going to happen is you're going to be able to cycle those available nutrients, so that when we have a free nutrient in the soil that's not necessarily being used by the cash crop, this vegetative root or vegetative plant is going to be able to take it up, metabolize it, and then re-release it as a root exudate. In the picture, this is a picture from Jimmy Emmons. He went out with his iPhone. He was doing some digging, and he saw an earthworm hole with a rye root growing through it. So he has a lens that he put on his iPhone and zoomed in, and so you can see all those little droplets. Those little droplets are root exudates. So these plants can really fire out a lot of good stuff into the soil to feed that biology. In a cash crop situation, this vegetative plant, we don't need to have huge densities. All we need is 1 to 2 per square foot. We don't want to cause competition. We don't want to cause issues, but we still need that certain density in order to have that root system colonize the free soil, especially in between the rows. We want to have a low growing, a short plant. This way, that short plant, it's not going to be using a lot of moisture, nor is it going to be using a lot of nutrients. It's not going to be tying them up. And because we're going to have this carbon release and having these root exudates, what that plant will do is going to play catch and release with a lot of these nutrients. So that this way, between the root exudates, number one, and number two, because the carbon to nitrogen ratio is going to be fairly tight on that low growing green material, when it dies, it's going to rot very quickly. The other thing we'll do is, with this extra diversity in this monoculture, potentially monoculture cash crop we have, it's going to increase the complexity of those root exudates, which once again is going to free up a lot of extra nutrients that a monoculture cannot access. In a native forage stand, we may have 100 species per square meter. And that 100 species per meter is going to be there every year. When we're dealing with monoculture cropping, now we're going to have one plant per year, one type of plant. When we have a rotation, and once again, there's, in my mind, way too many producers that in a rotation have 2 crops. But potentially, I do know producers that will have 10 crops in rotation. That's a fairly wide range, but even then, do we have enough diversity in those rotations? So your plants release these root exudates specific to that functional plant. So when we throw in more of these functional plant groups, we're going to have different root exudates. We're going to be stimulating different soil microbes. When we have that diversity of the soil microbes, now we're going to have more and more resilience in the soil. So when I'm talking about functional plant groups, I've put together these triangles just to help visualize. So the main functional plant groups that I work with are grasses, legumes, and broadleaf. And because the broadleaf grouping is so large, I've broken that into brassica, non-brassica, and forbs. Within each of those, we can break those down into warm and cool season species. And within each of the warm and cool season species, we can have annuals, biennials, and perennials. So when we start cranking up and we start talking about increasing functional plant groups, so within the grass group, we have the potential to have 6 different groups just within the grasses. So these are the things that we want to look at. Now, how well is a warm season perennial grass doing in our system? Not very well. So, that's going to be part of the limitation. What is adapted to grow here? What we want to do is include as many of these different functional plant groups as possible in a rotation. We want that diversity in this microbial population. This way, we're going to get away from a lot of nutrient deficiencies. We're going to get away from a lot of these disease issues. We're going to be driving up the the, the photosynthetic rate of our plants because we're going to be working on a lot of synergies. We're going to and also working on this plant ecology, so that when we look at the legumes and the grasses, the legumes need phosphate in order to fix nitrogen. Grasses accumulate phosphate. You have mycorrhizae; those two will link together. The phosphate will then be able to move both from the mycorrhizae and their phosphate solubilizing bacteria that associates with it, but also they'll be able to take that phosphate from that grass plant in exchange for carbon. We'll be able to shuttle it over to the legume to so that that phosphate can be used to fix more nitrogen, which then for exchange for some carbon can get shuffled over to cereal crop again. So we have this plant ecology that are working together, and there's no infighting in there unless we start talking about the scavengers. And this is one when we start looking at developing blends. These are the things I'm looking at. Is I'm thinking above ground. How does that plant grow? When does it grow? What are the characteristics? Is it annual, biennial, perennial? But also I'm thinking about below ground. I'm thinking about what is that root doing? So in the case of something like chicory, that chicory plant, it's not, especially year one, it's not going to have a lot of top growth, but that root will go down potentially 2 meters in that first year. So it's going to root down well past any other crop that we're trying to grow. And once again, not competing. But what we're doing is pushing carbon down. We have different root exudates. We have a lot of wins for using that. On the feed side, when we start increasing plant diversity and having more functional plant groups, this also solves a lot of livestock issues. When we start looking at how that rumen, what it needs, how it performs in the modern feedlot situation, that system is once again broken. Rumens are not designed to digest high starch diets. I'm working with dairies that we have actually gone away from high starch silages, gone to these forage based blends, and their profitability has improved immensely. If you listen to Dr. Christine Jones, she says the average native pasture in the world is 60% forb and 40% grass, which really bent my brain. So I was listening to her speak in Brandon, so 2.5 hour drive home, and I was thinking, but she didn't say legumes. But when you think about legumes in a pasture situation, what they're there for is usually the first 2 to 8 years, and they're there to build mycorrhizae. They're there to fix some initial nitrogen until the soils can wean themselves off of, in our case, in modern agriculture, that addiction to nitrates, and to get away from the bacteria-dominated soils. Once the legumes have done their job, then the free nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil, they start taking over. Or that's the plan, anyways. So when we have a nice diverse blend like this picture where we have a lot of those functional plant groups checked off, now those animals can just concentrate on eating, laying down, ruminating, and sleeping. So they're not hunting, trying to find the right plants to ingest so that their rumen can function properly. So this is, as I was saying earlier, that one dairy up at Birch Hills, another one north of Saskatoon. We've got them away from using high starch barley, high starch corn silage, and gone to in most of the time, it's about a 12 species mix. And what they're doing, both of them are using bag silage, so we're putting it straight into a bag. And using that with the feed analysis is actually, we do 3 blends, one for the dry cows, one for the heifers, and one for the milking cows. And with that, we can almost create a total mixed ration within that bag. The one at Birch Hills, uh, instead of going through basically 52 loads of barley during the year, what he uses is 2 through the whole year. The canola meal, same thing. He's gone from, was 28, he's gone back to 1 load. So it really reduced his external purchases. All that nutrition's in the bag. And the other really neat thing is when he sent the feed test away, the lab phoned him back and said, "We messed up. You have to send us a new sample because we messed up somewhere." So he sent another sample, and the lab manager, PhD, phoned him back and said, "What did you do?" He said, "Why? I just did silage, put it in the bag." When they do lactic acid tests, and when they do it in the lab, when they do a sample in the lab, they can usually max out about 74%. In Saskatchewan, during that year, they were somewhere between 55 and 60% lactic acid. When that dairy sent that sample in, he came in at 81%. This past year, he sent samples in, he came in at 89%. So this is just an indication of how complete that fermentation process happens. Because we have diversity of plants, we're going to have diversity of leaf exudates. So we're going to have different biology on each plant. We're going to have different levels of sugars and different types of sugars and proteins and all those other nutrients in that silage. So when that bag is closed up and it starts fermenting, it does a way more complete and consistent job. So what these dairies are seeing is, number one, their soil health has improved dramatically. With 14 inches of rain this past year, the dairy in near Prince Albert, we've almost eliminated all of his potholes just by going in and seeding late cover crops in these areas that flooded out. And in the last 3 years, he has reclaimed on his home half. He's reclaimed just about 100 acres. Significant. When we start looking at the plant health, basically he's doing a pre-seed burn off, and I'm going to try and talk him out of that. But he doesn't use any in-crop herbicides. These plants are just healthy and robust. And the other really neat thing is in the dairy world right now, using a high starch diet, animals are lasting about 3 cycles, and after that they're done. They're done. Now what both those dairies are seeing is the conception rates are way up. Milk production is up slightly, but their milk fat increased by 50%. And that is where their profit is coming from. Their cost went from $200 to $250 an acre down to $50. So they're making money. Reducing tillage. Most producers in Western Canada, minus the organic world, have done a decent job of reducing the amount of tillage we do. The key in this is maintaining that soil armor. The problem with that armor in a lot of cases is it is stagnant carbon. It's adding the mog on top, matter other than grain, but that's all it's doing. So it's protecting the soil, but it's not adding much to it. When we go to tillage, tillage stimulates the bacteria populations while decreasing our fungal populations. The issue with it is when we have low fungal populations, we're going to have low glomalin production or secretion, and we're going to have low soil aggregate stability. This is the reason why it's the knee-jerk reaction to get the track hoe out. Let's start draining these sloughs. Let's do tile drainage. In a lot of cases, it's a complete waste of time. All we have to do is increase our water infiltration, just like that dairy up in PA. When we have those areas, instead of having a solution to fix the symptom, what is the cause of it? What the cause is a hard pan. It's a hard pan because, okay, yeah, there's water sitting, but in this whole landscape, we have the water flowing from the higher elevations to the lower. Why not have that soil opened up everywhere so we have infiltration? Once again, we've had more droughts than we had flooding. Let's store that water. With speed discs becoming more popular, especially the ones with the curved blades, that destroys your soil structure. As you destroy the soil structure, you're really damaging your fungal populations. You're driving more bacteria. It's not a good thing in my mind. If you have a straight blade, like Salford has it was called an RTS at one time, so they have the straight blade. Uh, that I can live with on 20-inch centers. But as soon as you have a cup disc, you're throwing way too much dirt. You're destroying that structure, and that looks nice in black, but um, I use the word nicely in very loose context. When they start talking about they use these speed discs for straw management, once again, this fungal problem keeps coming up. In this case, it's going to be a loss of saprophytic fungi. The other issue is they're not managing their carbon to nitrogen ratio. By throwing in something green in with that straw, this is going to lower that C to N ratio. You're going to keep that biology going, and that straw will disappear. On our farm, I have problems keeping residue on the surface because my microbes are working so hard and so fast. My straw breaks down. I don't need to go in and do much for tillage. When we start looking at zero till and min till, and you can see all the graphs from all the research that you get this bump in organic matter, but it's not necessarily going to be the thing that's going to be building organic matter. It reduces the losses of soil organic matter, which is important, but in fact we need to be building organic matter. When you start looking at the zero till, so we have this nice mog on the surface, we've got good soil armor. 65 to 80% of the carbon in the above ground plant is lost to the atmosphere within 5 years because of respiration, because of oxidation, because of all of these processes. So when we have all of this good cover on the surface, okay, that's great, but we're still not necessarily doing that big bump unless we have those root exudates. Root exudates and the soil microbes in the soil, that's what drives soil organic building. So we need the diversity, we need living plants. Reducing the uses of synthetics. So when we start using fertilizer, what that is doing is it outsources all of our microbes jobs, or not all of them, but the ones that are important for finding those nutrients. 85% of the plant nutrients need to be, that are in the soil, have to go through the microbes in order to get into the plant. When Dr. Lane Ingham, when she was talking in Saskatoon a couple of years ago, she put up this Sparks test, and in our soils we have a pile of phosphate, but it's not available. And one of the things that she said was, when we have a nutrient deficiency, and unless we have erosion where that has physically been taken away from our land, basically what we have is a microbe issue. We have a microbial deficiency. When we get enough microbes in the soil, we get that active soil active, we can get those nutrients. And once again, you look at the forest, you look at the native grasses. Who's fertilizing them? No one. So we need to use that biology to our advantage instead of trying to hinder it. Okay, so yeah, nutrient deficiencies point to the microbial deficiencies. And this is the whole thing when I'm talking about reduced. Reduced is the key word in this. So reduced tillage, reduced use of synthetics, that is the key. Reduced. We don't necessarily have to go to zero. But all we need to do, instead of using blanket coverage, we use it when we need to. When 2,4-D was registered in the 1940s, it was registered with the thought process that when our agronomy fails, we can go in and we can spot spray to control some weeds that got away from us. And this is that whole regenerative agriculture of, we use the tools when we need to. When we have these problems, that's the time when, as agronomists and coaches, we need to go and review those agronomic practices. and the species that we're using, why did it fail? So we need to be more troubleshooters instead of uh, band-aid applicators. So the 60 years we've been at war with weeds, and probably a little longer than that. And if these herbicides were so effective, we should have absolutely eliminated all of those weeds. One of the books I highly recommend is by J. L. McCammon, When Weeds Talk. Those weeds, when they're growing, are telling us what's happening in the soil or what's not happening in the soil. Wild oats, one of the simple things we can do is get the fungal to bacteria ratio over 0.3, they magically disappear. If you listen to John Kempf, um, wise guy, just absolutely love a lot of his podcasts, his books, all the other good stuff. And he points to high free soil nitrates in our system as being one of the main issues in agriculture today. Nature wants to tie up those free nitrates. And this is the reason why we get this burst of weeds. When we put down fertilizer in the spring, how much does a plant, in the picture, how much does that seedling need? Well, when we put down all the nitrogen at first, that nitrogen eventually gets converted down to nitrate. Then what? Well, nature then steps in and gives us weeds. When we have a cover crop growing, or when we're managing, that nitrogen load in our soil, or nitrate load in the soil, we don't have that weed issue. Those high nitrate soils tend to be dominated by bacteria in the soil. And once again, the typical management to supply all that nitrogen beginning of the season, we should be looking more at spoon feeding these crops as we go along. Early season plant growth is slow, nitrogen requirements are low, but your biology is still firing. So it's using that. When we get that nitrogen source, it's unused, converted to nitrate, it signals those weeds to grow. Those conversion to nitrate by the microbes will consume organic matter. So when we have, once again, because we're carbon-based creatures, any nutrition we consume is always carbon-based. In the soil, microbes are carbon-based. Plants are carbon-based. Whenever they are eating something inorganic, they can't process it well, so they have to convert it over. In this case, when we put down 4600, it goes into the soil. There's no carbon attached to it. The microbes need carbon, so what they're going to do is they'll consume that inorganic nitrogen, but then they're looking for a carbon source. So if we don't have an active living root producing enough root exudates, then the soil organic matter is going to be consumed. And through some research, 30 metric tons of CO2 is released from every ton of nitrogen fertilizer applied to our soils without adding a carbon source. Nitrate is taken up passively by this plant, and that buildup of free nitrates in that plant creates toxicity. That high nitrate level in that plant is a magnet to your insects and to your diseases. The insects in nature are the garbage men of nature. So when a plant is sick, this is when diseases and the insects really get turned on to them. They're trying to get rid of them. We need to manage our nutrients better. We need to manage our system more efficiently. So using fungicides in our modern soils, once again, we're fungi deficient. The fungi is sensitive to tillage. It's sensitive to lack of plant diversity, that living root, and to basically all your chemicals that we're using. Using a lot of fungicides, both the seed-based and foliar, just speeds up the process of killing the fungi. The seed treatments, in my mind, are it just enforces the use of more fertilizer, because when we have healthy soils and we have seeds in the ground and we're managing them, I guess, naturally, When that seedling germinates, one of the first things you do for the mycorrhizal plants is it looks for mycorrhizal affiliation. So it wants to get infected. When we have these fungicide seed treatments on, it stops that mycorrhizal infection until that seed treatment wears off, and then we can then get the mycorrhizal infection. But by that time, we've lost potentially 3 weeks, 4 weeks of having this mycorrhizal infection going out and working on the symbiotic relationship. When we start looking at foliar applications, if we're dealing with the systemic fungicide, it's going to be going through the plant. It's going to get released as a root exudate into the soil, and once again, nuking the fungi in the rhizosphere. When we look at a contact fungicide, what we're going to be looking at in that scenario is, okay, so it goes on the leaves, it stems, the head, and it does not get into the root. Okay, that's a positive. But what'll happen is when that residue gets returned back to the soil and starts rotting, that fungicide is then re-released back into the soil, which once again kills off our fungi in our soil. So in this case, it'll be the saprophytic fungi that will be hurting. And once again, now we have this trash issue. How to get rid of it? Well, we're going to have to go to tillage, which once again kills off more fungi. Insecticides, Jonathan Lundgren, a wonderful resource for bugs. Basically, for in I think he talks about in a thousand bugs out there, we're dealing with one or two bad guys, and the rest are good. The rest of them, we have predators, we have all of these things that will correct themselves. And one of the research that I read in Jerry Burnetti's book is the use of these insect refuges around the fields. Huge benefit in having those. So we're talking small fields, so we can't do the 640 acres or bigger. We're talking about going back to 40 or 50 acre fields with these insect refuges around them. And he said basically the any issues with insect um, uh, predation or damage is greatly reduced. The other thing he talks about is reducing your tillage. Once again, you want to have that bit of a mat on the surface so that you have that dead plant material, and that's where a lot of your beetles will be living during the year. They're protected. They have shelter. Once again, the insects are a symptom of a broken system. Livestock integration. Our soils were built on the co-evolution of plants and grazing animals. And the whole concept is with the bison, they would come through, they would graze an area, and I love grazing bison because they are nature's mob grazers. When you see a herd of bison, and in this picture, that's normal. They're in a tight herd and they're always moving. Why? Because they have this fear of predators that is still bred into them. With beef cattle, you go on, if you had a herd like this, they'd be scattered over a half section and they'd be happy doing that because they have no fear. When we start talking about proper management, now what we're going to do is have a perimeter fence, or have the perimeter fence, but then we'll have the paddock fences of electric fence, and we're going to replace a predator with electric fence. So we're always going to be chasing behind them with this electric fence, pushing them forward and allowing them only to go so far ahead with that front electric fence. And this is where proper grazing builds soils. Improper grazing destroys countries and empires. And that's through a lot of Montgomery's books, a lot of stuff that he looks at through history. So the benefits of having this livestock in there is the saliva, urine, and manure. But when it comes to the farming operation, it creates diversified income. And this is what I'm doing. I don't own these bison. I'm getting paid to winter these bison on my land. So that the bison show up in October. And from October, they'll graze right until March. And this year, with 74 animals, I've supplied them with 9 bales. And when the owner came in and looked at them, he said, these heifers look in better shape than the bulls he has at home that he's feeding hay to. Because I have the plant diversity, they're out grazing, they're doing their thing, they're they're in good shape. And so from October till March, a typical farm isn't making any money off their land. In this case, I have the custom grazing that I'm getting paid for. So never mind the fact that I'm getting all of that manure and urine out in that field. Quick rule of thumb is a cow will produce about 10 gallons of urine per day, and then they'll ingest 32 pounds, 3% of dry matter intake of that animal. So they'll produce that much manure, where they only retain about 5% of what they consume. The rest of it goes out the back end. So, a real good way of building soil. The other neat thing with grazing is even if you have a field that you're having problems with production, this allows to bring in this livestock. We can seed down these saline areas, these spots that are having problems with water infiltration. We can go in there and address those areas. So whether it's a cover crop, whether it's whatever management, and now we can bring those livestock in there to get some money out of it. So once again, using these cover crops. Okay, as a cash crop guy, how do you get money out of it? This is where the custom grazing can pay some good dividends. Or in the case of bale grazing, so these saline areas, go out and put a whole bunch of bales. The cows will graze there. They'll waste use waste in quotes because never wasted, but we can have the animal impact in those saline areas and wasting stuff, so we can get that covered to stop evaporation. Now we're going to actually start working on fixing those areas. So utilizing areas in a field that are not cash crops, so sloughs, field margins, waterways that run in the spring, and then they're just grass throughout the year. And then be able to address these trouble areas and bring animals into graze. If you've ever talked to a livestock guy, they never have too much feed unless they've downsized their operation. So they're always looking for feed. So there's my philosophy of regenerative ag. Now we're going to go through some of the usual objections that people tell me that no, this doesn't work because. So one of the questions is, how do we grow crops without adding fertilizer? Where does the nutrition come from? And this is where, going back through history, our plants, microbes, and soils have been working basically since glaciation. They've been working. They have a system working that works very well without our help. And once again, that help is sometimes not quite right. We have rich soils. When you look at a Sparks test, the nutrition's there. And once again, nature isn't looking at a one and done deal. She's looking for basically an eternity system to keep it going. So when we are looking at where does the nutrition come from, we're going to be looking at getting into composts when we get into areas that we have some issues. We can use some fertilizer, but once again, we want to be able to use it so that we're not creating problems. We're going to add to nature, not interfere with nature. And when we have a healthy functioning system, that soil will balance nutrition for that plant. Once again, we are here as coaches to monitor, to make sure that things are going right. Are we? Do we have an issue with, one nutrient, or do we have water infiltration? So then, how do we get around that to bring that soil alive? And once again, it's not going to be, one and done from the standpoint of coaching. We need to be on top of it because we have to earn the right to reduce our inputs. When we start looking at, the first thing that Dr. Christine Jones talks about is get rid of your fungicides. Number 2, get rid of your phosphate fertilizers, and grow a polycrop and make sure you have a legume in there to keep your mycorrhizae going. The other thing about the legume is, the amount of nitrogen we use. I have not bought nitrogen for our farm for 14 years because I figured out that legumes can produce a pile of nitrogen for us. And so, when you're looking at what makes up our atmosphere, 78% is nitrogen. And Christine Jones was talking about, for above every square meter of our soil, there's 440 tons of nitrogen. Let's get in there. Let's use it. It's easy. And so once we get the legumes going, once we get our free living microbes at fixing nitrogen going, then we have that part of the system beat. One of the other things is this intercropping and relay cover cropping. Easy way of getting nitrogen in. Next question is, are we mining the soil? And is this sustainable? And the whole, to what's the right word, to take off everything that is being produced, and we harvest it all, we take it off the field. Yes, now we're mining everything. And especially when we start looking at these root crops, where we're actually digging into soil to even get more out. Yeah, that is getting to the point where we're mining. When we can start dealing with compost, manure, uh, taking these other amendments, it can replace a lot of these losses. So this way, yeah, we're on a bit of a declining scale, but when we have some place that we have excess nutrients. So this may be human waste. It's going to be, what's happening with all of the food from the restaurants, from the grocery stores. There's a pile of nutrition in there, and it just gets dumped into the most landfills. So instead, let's get that back out in the field. When we're doing any testing, make sure we are testing for the organic nutrition along with our inorganic. It irritates me when I see a soil test and all I see is nitrate. I have no measure of where the ammonium is. Uh, we need to have this full test, and this is where doing the water extractable, doing the weak acid, doing the Reams test or Sparks test. Let's get a full measure of what's out there. Will it maintain my yields, and what's my success? I do not care about yield. And this is what Dr. Chris Nichols has talked about basically in every one of her talks. The word that needs to disappear out of agriculture is yield. The yield doesn't do anything. All yield does is build ego and bragging rights. Net dollars is the important measure that we need to be looking at. And in regenerative ag, when we start controlling our costs, and instead of spending money on nitrogen, we can take away that cost and replace it with using some legumes. We can grow a crop like this winter triticale crop with very little inputs. So profitability in this case, even though my yield may go down 20%, I've reduced my cost by 60%. And there's two ways of increasing your net dollars: increasing your gross and keeping your costs the same, or reducing your cost and assuming your gross doesn't drop more than your cost. So can you maintain the yields? You don't need to maintain that. You don't need to get a 75 bushel canola crop every year. You don't need to. How do you monitor your crops? Soil testing, so both biological, chemical, and physical testing is done. Uh, Water infiltration test, really easy thing. You pound the ring in, you dump the water in, time it. Real good way to monitor what's happening in your soils. Penetrometer, real good tool. Go out and see, where's that hard pan? If the hard pan is deeper, why don't we have deeper tap roots in our rotation, or as a relay cover crop? Using tissue tests, using sap analysis. So it's all the same tools that are being used right now. It's taking a look a little deeper. The other thing is this funny shovel here. Dig, and just not the top little bit. Get down and see what that soil profile looks like. We should not see a distinct A horizon. You should always see, like in this picture, kind of a morphing, pushing down effect of that black. Jimmy Emmons down in Oklahoma says he can increase his A horizon on average 1 inch per year. when you think geologically, that takes thousands of years. And when we build from the bottom up, yeah, they're absolutely right. When we're building from the top down, we can do that. We can build a horizon easy. As long as we have that living root, as long as we're reducing our synthetics, we have a healthy system working. How do you manage grower expectations? First of all, they will set their goals. So is it water infiltration? Is it weed suppression? Is it reduced input expenses? Now, once they set the rules of the game, now I can coach them to match their goals. So if they say that they're looking at increasing their water infiltration, and at the end of the year they say, yeah, but my nitrogen didn't go up. Well, you didn't tell me you wanted your nitrogen to go up, so we weren't able to handle that. So it's really important that them setting their goals is going to that's going to direct how we're going to be coaching them as their progression in regenerative ag evolves. So are their goals. Once they find out what these cover crops can do, when they can find out what relay cropping does, what increasing the soil health. And when you look at the picture of this soil sample, the guy he once again, this is early in my career in cover cropping, where he said, yeah, he's going to grow cover crops. Okay. And after the third year, he phoned me and he said, 3 years, I've had a handful of plants grow. And I said, what do you mean? Yeah, we had lots of good diversity. We had, checked off all the boxes, but because I'm so busy and I do a lot of expecting what the farmer knows what he's working with, I said, okay, nothing grew in 3 years. I have to come up and take a look. So I jumped on my shovel, and at 230 pounds, I can usually put a shovel in the ground. Here I was going down about a centimeter. So by the time I found a spot I could dig down, this is what it looked like. It was an absolute wreck. That's dirt. There's no soil in there. So we got in there and we got deeper and coaching. So the cover crops, yeah, that's still a tool we'll use, but how are we going to get this stuff alive? Is it all or nothing? Can we still use spray? Can we still use fertilizer and still be, in quotes, regenerative? Yeah, absolutely. What I'm doing, and when people ask me, like, am I organic? No, I'm not organic. People say, well, so you're conventional. No, I'm not conventional. I'm a hybrid between. So I use a lot of organic principles in my management. And so for a producer, what is their goal? If they want to have healthy soils and get away from inputs within 3 years, okay, we're going to use a lot of organic principles. If they are looking at just increasing water infiltration, oh, okay, so all we need to do is put in a little bit of Italian ryegrass and subterranean clover in with their wheat. Bingo, bango, Bob's your uncle. We're going to get there. So depending on the goals of how aggressive we can getting away or staying with. But there are some common things of reducing tillage, reducing fungicides, and increasing plant diversity. So using some fertilizer at the right time for the right reason, yeah, absolutely, put it down. It's a tool. Do it. But avoiding that blanket fertilizer application when you don't need it, because once again, you're going to be putting a lot of your microbes on welfare. Using a touch of herbicides to control agronomic mistakes, or in this transition period of going into regenerative ag, you're going to get some weeds. So to go in and get away from the residuals, nothing wrong with that. It's part of that package and tool. But now, once again, you've reduced the amount of cost per acre. You're reducing the amount of impact you have. Or you go to the next step of throwing in some a carbon source in with your herbicides to make it more efficient. So whether it's fulvic acid or it's or sugar, or some of these other products that will make these products more effective. Same as the fertilizer, making sure there's a carbon source. So the lower amount of following those principles, the longer it's going to take for those soils to heal. Each farm is going to have their own path. So I do not have a cookie cutter approach. First question I ask when I'm talking to producers, when I'm talking cover crops, what is your goal? What kind of soil you're working on? What's your weed issues? Asking those background questions that are giving me information about your fungal to bacteria ratio, your carbon to nitrogen ratio, where your soil health is. Once again, from a distance, and I get pretty close most times. Once that farm develops their path, when they start understanding the principles, then they're going to start breaking down on, this field, it's a little different texture. It has different slope. It has different salinity. Now we're going to create a slightly different path for that field. And this is that evolution. And this is where, once again, they're going to need coaching in order to have that information to understand when do we need to change or modify our our practices. Where do we start? Setting goals. Number one, identify the issues. And is it a symptom or is it a cause? That's the big ones. Assessing your natural and equipment inventories. We need to assess where that level of soil health is. So that infiltration test, the soil penetrometer, or grab samples, send away for biological, chemical, and physical testing. But going back, what the first thing to do is have a living root of that vegetative plant growing for as many days as we can through that whole growing season. Annual cash crops only feed microbes for 30 to 50 days when they're in that vegetative stage. After that, those root exudates become tougher and tougher to break down. So it's not, that plant isn't building for the microbes now, it's building for the seedlings that next year. So we need to have that living root. Bugs in a jug. Are they good? My first question is, what is it? And in a lot of these cases, what you'll find is these bugs in the jug are bacterial dominated. I'm not interested. Or we have, in most of these cases, we have between 0.1 and 0.2 fungal bacteria ratio. So adding more bacteria is just going to push us the wrong way. If we're dealing with a pasture that's non-productive, yeah, throw some bacteria in there. That's what my strategy is to lower the fungal bacteria ratio. But in agricultural, like cash crop land, not a fan of bacteria. We got lots. So when we're adding these bugs in a jug, we have two important criteria to look at. Number one, do we have enough microbial food in that system to support more microbes? So do we have those root exudates? Number two, do we have enough microbes present? So if we have lots of microbes but not enough food, adding more microbes isn't going to be enough. And what microbes are there? Which ones are active? So if we're dealing with lots of bacteria in the soil, but we're only dealing with 1,000 species, well, maybe that's a case where we're adding this bacteria. If we're adding that diversity, that's going to be a good thing. But all we have to do is get those root exudates, get that microbial food going, and then we're going to create that diversity in the soil from what's dormant in our soils. So I have seen some good products in for these biostimulants, microbial additives, all these other terms you can use. I've seen some really good products, and I've seen lots of snake oil. The biological testing is going to be the first step. So number one, what is it? Number two, do a strip. Put a strip into your fields with your crop and see if you see response. And this is where that biological the stimulators, the soil amendments, the soil biological enhancers, you need to understand what they're doing and where you're starting at. And this is where the biological testers do. But at the big picture, if we have that living root with root exudates, you have this manure out there. The manure, the rumen is full of biology too. So when that manure hits the ground, it's automatically increasing the diversity in that soil of the biology. So as a summary, nature's been growing plants longer than we have. She knows best. All we have to do is start understanding how she does it. And once again, because Chris Nichols says if she studied the soil biology for another 1,000 years, she might be able to start understanding it. So anybody that says they know and understand the soil ecosystem, I usually, in my mind, I chuckle, because there's so many ecosystems and so many different interactions. It's so complicated. But I do know that our soils have been damaged, especially our fungal component in our soils. In particular, our mycorrhizae. When we build up our mycorrhizae, we get this this system firing, farming becomes so much easier. We get over that zero point 0.3 fungal to bacteria ratio. A lot of our annual weeds disappear because now we're starting to tie up our nitrates. When we tie up our nitrates, we build a fungi population. Farming becomes fun. And how we have to do it, we have to fix our ecology. We have to fix our nutrient cycles. We have to get that carbon back into the ground. When the carbon's in the ground, now we're going to have functioning systems, because carbon is the currency in the soil. That's what drives our soils and our plant production. As a quick reading list, if you want to get deeper into this, Mycorrhizal Planet by Michael Phillips, really good book. The Farm as an Ecosystem, really interesting book. John Kempf, between his book and his podcasts, you do a bunch of learning there. There's a series of books. There's Teaming with Fungi, Teaming with Bacteria, Teaming with Microbes. Lighter reading, like they're skinnier books, but really good stuff. Call of the Reed Warbler by Charles Massey. David Montgomery's books, The Fundamentals of Soil Ecology, and When Weeds Talk. Good background information on getting deeper into this. Ray Wheel, his textbook is another really good one that I forgot to add on to here. There is my contact information, and so if you're trying to get a hold of me, I did write a book. If you want to get a little more of my philosophy, the cover cropping in Western Canada, you can get it through covercropping.ca or through Amazon or Friesen Press. There's both hard copy, paperback, and a digital copy. So